End of the Present World and Mysteries of the Life to Come. Part 8. St. John Chrysostom says, "The man who burns with the fire of divine love is as indifferent to glory and ignominy as if he were alone and unobserved on this earth. He is no more troubled by pincers, gridirons, or racks than if these torments were endured by flesh other than his own. What is full of sweetness to the world has no attraction, no relish for him. He is no more liable to be captivated by some evil attachment than is gold, 7 times tested, liable to be tarnished by rust. Such are, even on this earth, the effects of divine love when it grips a soul. Now, divine love acts upon the souls of whom I am speaking with all the greater force, in that, being separated from their bodies, deprived of all human consolations and abandoned to 1,000 martyrdoms, they are compelled to have recourse to God and to seek in Him alone all that they lack. One of the greatest of their sufferings is the knowledge that the pains which they endure bring no benefit to them. Night has come for them, when they can no longer labor or acquire anything. The night cometh when no man can work. The time when man was able to make satisfaction himself for his sins, accumulate merit, and increase his heavenly crown ceases with death. The moment he enters the other life, every human being receives the pronouncement of his eternal sentence. His fate is immutably fixed, and he no longer has the option of accomplishing good or bad works, for which he can once more be answerable at God's tribunal. Yet, if the souls in purgatory cannot grow in holiness and amass new merits by their patience and resignation, they nevertheless know that they can no longer lose merit, and, for them, it is a sweet joy to suffer out of a free, altogether disinterested love. Without doubt, this peculiar mixture of happiness amidst the cruelest torment is a state which our gross minds cannot comprehend, but asks the martyrs, the Teresas, the Lucians, and the celestial lovers of the cross. They will tell you that, most often, it is in sorrow and amidst afflictions and the most cruel spiritual desolations that he who seeks to live in God alone experiences a kind of foretaste of paradise, and feels the sweetest and most exhilarating joys and delights pour into his heart. The souls in purgatory love God. Furthermore, they are loved by the churches of heaven and earth, who maintain continuous contact and relations with them. The Catholic Church appeals to the charity of her children, and, through their mediation, lavishes her petitions and aid upon them day and night. Every moment the charity of the good angels bestows upon them the heavenly dew, which the good Jesus sends down from his heart. They love one another, and console each other in ineffable intercourse. No unfathomable gulf separates these souls and their friends on earth, and we are free at every moment to bring them that drop of water which the rich fool sought in vain from the pity of Lazarus. St. John once had a wonderful vision. He saw a temple, and in the sanctuary of this temple perceived an altar, and beneath this altar the multitude of suffering souls. Vidi subtis altare animas interfectorum. These souls are not in front of the altar, as one commentator remarks. They are not permitted to be there. They participate in the fruit of the Eucharistic sacrifice only indirectly, by means of intercession. They are below the altar, and await, resigned, although in torment, the portions which we are willing to convey to their lips. The Catholic Church has made no definition on the location of purgatory. Different opinions have been expressed on this point by the doctors and fathers, and we are free to choose any of them without offending against orthodoxy or departing from the true faith. St. Thomas, St. Bonaventure, and St. Augustine teach that purgatory, situated in the center of the earth, is an intermediate abode between the hell of the damned and limbo, where the children who died unbaptized are detained, at least until the judgment. They quote, in support of their opinion, the words sung by the Church's command, "Lord, deliver the souls of the faithful departed from the pains of hell and the deep pit." Likewise, these words from the Apocalypse, "And no man was liable, neither in heaven, nor on earth, nor under the earth, to open the book, nor to look upon it." From these words of St. John, it is certain that only just men were invited to open the mysterious book. Now, by this reference to those who are below the earth, does not the apostle seem to give it to us to understand that there are some just people who are detained for a time in these dark depths? Elsewhere in Ecclesiasticus it is said, "I shall enter into the lower parts of the earth, and shall visit those who sleep, and the hope of salvation shall appear in their sight." Scholars have shown that the inspired author intended in this passage to indicate limbo, where the patriarchs and the saints of the Old Testament rested at the bosom of Abraham. This explanation confirms, rather than invalidates, the view of St. Thomas and Bonaventure. In fact, if the patriarchs and the just of the Old Testament, once purified of all their actual sins, had the lower regions of the earth as their abode until the day when sin transmitted to our race by Adam had been completely erased on the cross, it seems all the more fitting that souls guilty of actual sins, for which have not sufficiently atoned, should be punished and detained in the depths of the earth. Inferiores partes terrae. The testimony of St. Augustine adds a further degree of probability to this opinion. In his epistle, he states that when Christ descended into hell, he went not only to limbo, but also to purgatory, where he delivered some of the captive souls, and seems to be indicated in the Acts of the Apostles. Solutis doloribus inferne. The second opinion concerning the location of purgatory is shared by St. Victor and by St. Gregory the Great in his dialogues. Both maintain that purgatory is not a fixed place, and that a large number of deceased souls atone for their faults on earth, and in the same places where they sinned the most frequently. Sacred theology reconciles these different testimonies by establishing, first, that purgatory is a fixed place, with given bounds, situated at the center of the earth, where the majority of souls go in order to atone for the faults by which they were sullied. Nevertheless, the purgatory is not restricted to this one single place. Whether by reason of the gravity of their sins, or through a special dispensation of divine wisdom, they are a considerable number of other souls who do not languish in that prison, but undergo their punishment on earth. and in that place where they had sinned. This interpretation, which comes from the great theologians, explains and confirms a multitude of apparitions and revelations made to the saints, several of them having marks of truth which make it impossible to dismiss them. In order to elucidate our doctrine, we shall select, amongst all the revelations quoted by St. Gregory in his dialogues, those of which the authenticity is beyond all question. In the Annals of Citeaux, it is related that a pilgrim from the district of Rodez, returning from Jerusalem, was obliged by a storm to put in at an island close to Sicily. There he visited a holy hermit who inquired about matters pertaining to religion in his country of France, and also asked whether he knew the monastery of Cluny and Abbot Odilon. The pilgrim replied he did, and added that it would be grateful if he would tell him what purpose he had in asking him that question. The hermit answered, "Very near this place there is a crater, the summit of which we can see. At certain times it belches up clouds of smoke and flame. I have seen demons carrying off souls of sinners and hurling them into the frightful abyss, in order to torment them for a while. Now, on certain days, I hear the evil spirits conversing amongst themselves and complaining that some of these souls have escaped from them. They blame pious persons who, by their prayers and sacrifices, hasten the deliverance of these souls. Odilon and his monks were the ones who seemed to terrify them most. That is why, when you return to your country, I ask you in the name of God to exhort the abbot and monks of Cluny to redouble their prayers and alms for the relief of these poor souls." The pilgrim, on his return, did as he was bidden. The holy abbot Odilon pondered and weighed everything carefully. He sought enlightenment from God, and ordained that, in all the monasteries of his order, the 2nd day of November each year should be established in commemoration of all the faithful departed. Such was the origin of the Feast of All Souls. St. Bernard, in his Life of St. Malachi, quotes another case. This saint relates that one day he saw his sister, who had been dead for some time. She was doing her purgatory in the cemetery. On account of her vanity and the attention she has devoted to her hair and body, she had been sentenced to live in the very grave where she had been buried, and to witness the dissolution of her body. The saint offered the sacrifice of the Mass for her for 30 days. At the end of this period he saw his sister again. This time she had been sentenced to complete her purgatory at the gate of the church, doubtless because of her irreverent demeanor in the holy place. Perhaps she had distracted the faithful from the sacred mysteries in order to draw eyes and appreciation to herself. She was exceedingly sad, wearing a mourning veil, and she was in extreme anguish. The saint offered the sacrifice once more for 30 days, and she appeared to him at the last time in the sanctuary, with unruffled countenance, radiant in a white robe. The bishop knew by this sign that his sister had gained her deliverance. This story records the universal custom which prevailed from the very first ages of the Church, of praying for the dead over a period of 30 days. On this point, Christianity had merely followed the Mosaic tradition. The patriarch Jacob, on his deathbed, said to his sons, "Bury me in the double cave, over against Mamre, in the land of Canaan." And the grandsons of Isaac mourned their father for 30 days. On the death of the high priest Aaron and his brother Moses, the people again observed this 30 days mourning. and the pious custom of praying for the dead for the whole month soon became a law of the chosen people. St. Clement stated that St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles, liked to have prayers said for the relief of the dead. And St. Dionysius describes in magnificent terms the statelessness from which the faithful celebrated their funeral rites. From the very first centuries, the Church encouraged prayers for a month after the deaths of the faithful, in memory of the 30 days mourning observed under Mosaic law. O you that sorrow after creatures whom you wrongly think absent, you that shed tears because you can't set eyes upon the cherished faces no more, understand that the doors of their prison are wide open to your prayers and charity. The prophet used to gain solace from the deaths of his friends who died in the peace of God by diligently visiting them with incomparable confidence, repeating the words, I will penetrate to all the lower parts of the earth. I will behold all that sleep, and will enlighten all that hope in the Lord. We almost fear that our words may chill your devotion towards these souls, that as you hear of their many positive consolations, your compassion may diminish, and you may not have for them all the pity that they deserve. Let us then recall all that happiness and consolation are mingled with sorrows and torments. 2. We said, my dear brethren, that those souls confirmed in grace are marvelously consoled by the certainty of their salvation. On the other hand, as they are freed from the body which, like a thick veil, darkened their view and understanding of invisible supernatural things, they suffer cruelly from the delay in possessing God. In this world, the absence and remoteness of God brings only a mild regret to the majority of men. Captivated by the lure of the goods of this world, absorbed in the display of tangible objects, we comprehend God too imperfectly to realize how much the loss of Him means. But when we die, the veil of the senses will be rent. All our human attachments will perish, and the inanities which bemused us will have gone forever. There will be no more amusements, pastimes, and conversation. Then our inclinations, aspirations, and all our propensities will center upon this divine spouse, our sole and incomprehensible treasure. These poor souls, eager to be embraced eternally, rush towards God, who is their end, with more energy than a magnet attracts iron, and with a greater impetuosity than in natural things rush towards their center. At this great ruin, which is death, in the complete separations from all those objects from which our life returns, the soul has nothing left other than this love which flees from him, leaving only the unimaginable regret that, through his own fault, he has delayed by a day, a year, or a century, that consummated union which, for him, must be real and perfect, the sole and everlasting happiness. Imagine how bitter and heart-rending it is for a mother to bear the separation of the son who has left for distant lands, or has died a premature death, and who she cannot hope to see again. From the moment when this mother's eyes cease to rest on that beloved child, a part of her life is gone. There is no joy or pleasure in the world capable of filling that deep, unfathomable void which the departure or loss of that son had created in her heart. How much more bitter and heart-rending are the cries of the hapless soul You can hear him calling out from the desolate place of his atonement, "Where is he who is the soul of my soul?" It is useless for me to seek him on this bed of flames where I feel only gloom and emptiness. Oh, beloved of my heart, why keep me in this long suspense? Increase my torments. If necessary, put centuries of punishment into the minutes. How severely you punish me for my ignominy and indifference when you withdraw yourself from the ardent soul which longs to see you, to lose itself in you, and to dissolve in you. To this punishment of separation from God is added the punishment of fire. Let us state, however, that in order to be precise, and to express no debatable or disputable opinion, that the Church has not defined that the souls in purgatory undergo the effects of a material fire. It is merely a truth of divine faith and theologically certain. At the first session of the Council of Florence, the fathers of the Greek Church were unwavering in their formal refusal to accept the materiality of the fire of purgatory. On the other hand, they unanimously acknowledge that purgatory is a dark place where souls, free from the punishment of fire, endure very severe sufferings and penalties, consisting chiefly in the darkness and anguish of a cruel imprisonment. The fathers of the Latin Church, who were unanimous in maintaining the opposite opinion, did not, however, consider that the Greek Church, on this point, strayed from the faith. That is why, in the decree uniting the two churches, there was no mention of a punishment of fire. It was stated simply that those souls which have not entirely satisfied God's justice in this life endure, in the life to come, penalties proportionate to the number and gravity of their sins, and that the sufferings they endure are attenuated and shortened by the prayers of the good works of the living, particularly the sacrifice of the Mass. If, in defining the punishments of purgatory, the Council of Florence did not consider it opportune to mention the existence of fire, whether out of deference to the fathers of the Greek Church and in order not to hold back a long-sought reconciliation, or, in addition, because their error did not endanger the essence and substance of the dogma, the existence of a material fire in purgatory must not be held as anything less than a proven truth, which cannot be subject to any doubt or attenuation. In the first place, at the very Council of Florence, the materiality of the fire of purgatory was maintained by the unanimous vote of all the fathers of the Latin Church. So this opinion has in its favor a longer line of tradition, as well as the belief in almost all the doctors. St. Paul appears formally to teach it in these words, "Salve erunt, sic quasi per ignum, yet they themselves shall be saved, yet so as by fire." 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15. And it should be noted that he does not use the particle quasi as a diminutive, but in order the better to explain the manner of purification. Finally, all the visions and revelations dealing with purgatory liken the pains and fire which they are endured to the pains and fires of hell, with the sole reservation that this fire is not eternal, but temporary. A question arises here, which is not easy to answer. How can a material fire act upon the souls separated from their bodies and upon pure spirits? We reply that this is a mystery of God's justice, a secret which human reason will never succeed in comprehending. All that theology teaches us about purgatory is that this material fire is not identical with the human soul, nor united to it in substance, as in this world the spirit of the body. When the saints and eminent doctors tell us that the reprobate and the souls in purgatory are arrayed in a body of fire, they are speaking metaphorically, adopting our way of thinking. What is quite certain is that, as a number of doctors have maintained, the fire will not confine itself to forming a sort of prison or enclosure around the souls, whom it torments and purifies. It will not merely make them suffer from the vexations which it inflicts upon their will, and from the obstacles it will place in the way of its use and full development of their intellectual powers and their sensory faculties. The true opinion is that the fire of purgatory, although corporal, will act as an instrument of God's justice and, in some indescribable way, pierce the soul to the quick. This is the view expressed in the following words of St. Augustine. Cur enim non dicamus quam vis miris, tamen veris modis, etiam spiritus incorporeos posse poena corporale ignis affligde. So it will act directly upon the soul. The same thought is expressed more clearly by St. Gregory when he says, "It is a visible corporal fire, which will cause an invisible fire and pain in the soul." Who can ever understand how penetrating this fire is, which, unlike that of the earth, does not attack man through the medium of his material covering, but acts on the quick of the substance? This active and marvelously efficacious fire, which penetrates the most secret recessions of the soul, as far as the channels uniting it with the spirit, usque ad divisionem anime et spiritus, reaching into the division of the soul and the spirit. A fire which does not let any stain subsist, an immortal fire, which discerns even those defects which the eye of the creature cannot perceive, a fixed fire, as the prophet calls it, which crushes the guilty soul, consumes and encompasses it, without granting it a single moment's rest. A fire, the intensity of which is not moderated by any relief, or subject to any alteration, which puts the children of Levi to the test, like gold and silver in the furnace. Sedebit conflans et purgabit filios Levi, et colabit eos quasi aurum, et argentum. And he shall sit refining and cleansing, and he shall purify the sons of Levi, and shall refine them as gold and as silver. In our world, pain is intermittent. A fever is not the same violence all the time. Sleep suspends the sick person's groans. He can turn from one side to the other on his bed of suffering, and find solace in the conversation of his friends. But the fire of purgatory consumes unceasingly and unremittingly. Every moment these souls feel and bear the whole weight and vigor of a pain which they are unable to put out of their minds for a single minute, a single second. A certain person who underwent a terrible operation had refused to be anesthetized. She suffered without uttering a sigh, gazing at the picture of Jesus Christ. The operation took 5 minutes. When it was over, she said, "It seemed to me to have lasted a century." Just as it is recognized that a feeling of intense joy makes the mind oblivious to the passage of time, so one can imagine a pain so severe as to make 1 minute seem like eternity. If this is so, if, in purgatory, Minutes are the equivalent of years, and years the equivalent of centuries. It will be like to remain in the depths of that dark prison for nights, for years on end, until the end of the world. O you, whose lives are so lax, who do not fear to stain yourselves with 1,000 faults in order to please the world or spare your body for a moment's trouble, tell us, have you understood the mysteries of God's justice? And have you meditated upon the length of the torments that await you? Indica mihi si habes intelligentiam. O primitive church, cradle of Christianity, model of all ages, who numbered as many saints as faithful and, taught by the apostles, received the oracles of the incarnate Word at first hand, how frightful was your idea of the greatness and the penalties due to sin. You made amends in this life which astound us. In the church of the early ages, canon law was applied in its full vigor. There was no remission or concession. Penance and works of satisfaction were imposed strictly, according to what was required in order to satisfy completely the justice of God. That penance did not consist in reciting a few short prayers. It consists of long fasts on bread and water, daily recitation of the Psalms, long and painful pilgrimages, and a considerable number of pious works. A thief, depending on the amount stolen, was sentenced to 2 or 5 years' penance, a blasphemer to 7 years, an adulterer to 10 and often 12 years of fasting, tears, and public prostrations on the threshold of the sacred place. On this frightful calculation, the entire life spent in the macerations of the anchorites, even if it were as long as that of the ancient patriarchs, would scarcely be enough to atone for the most ordinary habitual signs of the men of our time. How long and terrible the purgatory of most sinners will be. Without doubt, one ought capable of lightening the sorrow of those suffering souls would be that of their memory is not lost, and the friends whom they have left in this earth are working to aid and deliver them. Alas, that is a consolation which their hearts cherish in vain. True, it is our custom to show the sorrow which we render to their memory, and undoubtedly religion is far from condemning this honor rendered to grief. Rather, indeed, it does condemn the hardness of the heart of those who have no sooner lost their parents and friends than they cease to remember them. The saints used to mourn their friends, but the greatest concern was to help them. It was not tears in which St. Monica asked of St. Augustine when, on her deathbed, she said to him, "Son, I bid you remember me each time that you offer the sacrifice at the altar." It was not by tears that St. Ambrose sought to mark the deep attachment he felt for the Emperor Theodosius when he said, "I have loved this prince, and because I have loved him, I shall not leave him until I have led him to that abode which his virtues call him. O people, hasten hither and, together with me, bestow upon the remains of this prince the incense of your prayers, the outpouring of your charity, and the grief of your penance." What am I saying? Tears? Those tears that promised ever to flow soon dry up. Our fickle, selfish hearts grow tired of calling out names which utter no sound in answer, of seeking to recall images which have forever vanished from our sight. Caught up in the whirlwind of the world and its inanities, we shrink from the grim and painful memory. Severance is followed by oblivion, and the pains of the dead are the most forgotten of all pains. Poor deceased! After a few days spent in grief and mourning, a few courtesies paid to form and convention, you will be buried once more in a tomb, crueler and colder than the one which you first laid, and that second tomb will be oblivion, harsh, inhuman, unrelenting, oblivion. Like that winding sheet, the final clothing of the dust on your limbs, oblivion which will envelop your silent dwelling places, which no one will visit any more, oblivion over your name, which no one will utter again, oblivion in your home, in the hearts of your friends and children, where no subject to conversation will evoke your memory. Yes, a deep, complete, and irredeemable oblivion. And this despite the most heart-rending farewells which were addressed to you, despite the vows to your immortal memory, and the declarations so full of tenderness. One day our Lord Jesus Christ met a most unhappy man at the side of the pool. The man's face was as pale as death, and his eyes were sunken and lusterless, and his limbs withered and stiff. He lay paralyzed and motionless on the bank of the pool of Probatica, trampled upon by passers-bys, exposed to all weathers and to all inclemencies of the air. Nevertheless, he was by no means afflicted with an incurable disease. For him to be cured, there was no need to consult skilled doctors, or to search the valleys and mountains for medicines, or strange and rare herbs. It was enough to give him a little push and put him into the pool at the time when the angel of the Lord descended to stir its waters. Yet in a town as populous as was the capital of Judea, amidst the mass of pilgrims who came from every part of the world for the feasts, there was not one relative, not one friend, to render him such an easy service. Jesus, seeing this paralytic one day, was moved to pity, and with emotion in his voice, said to him, "Wilt thou be made whole?" The infirm man replied, "Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pond." What a striking picture this unhappy paralytic gives us of the soul whose complaints I have described. They sit by the side of the pool of that blood which has saved the world. They have no power to gather up its fruits, or to administer the vivifying drops to themselves. It may be for years that they have implored us in vain, and have been tortured for lack of a helping hand. In this world, the afflicted person has always some expedient. The most unfortunate have at least their tears, and when everything, both divine and human, fails us at the same time, when we have to contend with injustice and oppression, and suffer abuses and excesses of power, we still have a place of refuge in our own hearts, where God always awaits us. Each of our sorrows can become a sacrifice for us. Each can be turned into a crown and treasure. To suffer intermittently, however, knows that nothing will come of it. To shed hot tears and to feel that their burning dew will bring no growth, and that suffering will follow suffering until the divine justice is satisfied. That is a situation capable of softening hearts of steel, a misfortune which can be mourned only with tears of blood, and to which no one in whose soul any feeling of humanity and compassion lingers can remain indifferent. Ah, if, beneath that thick soil which covers their bodies, if, from the shelter of their dark, impenetrable dwelling places, these souls could awaken for a moment and bring their harrowing cries and groans to our very ears and hearts, what depth of feeling would there be in their wailing, and with what tones of indescribable anguish would they appeal for our aid? Ah, they would say, "Have pity on us, you who were our friends. Break our fetters, save us, deliver us. Arise, go over the places where we have lived, and the deeper the silence over our tombs, the louder let your voices be raised. The priest of Jesus Christ, minister to all misfortunes, let this forgetful child hear the voice of his mother. I had reared him. I lived for him alone. He was the child of my heart. When I lay in my last agony, he would have wished to prolong my days at the cost of his own. Ask him how religion is powerless now to remind him of me. Priest of Jesus Christ, raise your voice louder still. Do not fear to bring shame and remorse into the soul of that unconcerned husband who seeks solace for his widowhood in licentiousness. Ask him where his sworn faith is, what has become of that tenderness and fidelity of which he gave me such warmth and striking demonstrations right up to the moment of my death. Ask him how it is that today I have to beg his solicitude and support with such heart-rending cries. Ah, that he is still unmoved and provides me with bitter proof that I am forever dead in his heart. Tell our friends, and strangers as well, who are not related to us by blood, but who are our brothers in faith, passing unconcernedly over that troubled sea of human life, where they are swept along by the rapid waves, just as were not long ago. Tell them to stop and consider whether there exists any pain more bitter and intense, and at the same time more neglected and solitary than ours. Ah, we beseech you, brother, father, husband, friend, from the depths of this pool of fire, we implore you, a drop of water, a prayer, an act of fasting or almsgiving, a helping hand that we shall be saved. Brother, friend, father, husband, reflect that, if we are suffering, it is partly because of you. Yes, that soul suffers because of us. That mother suffers because she was too soft with her son, because she did not correct his faults or chastise the misdeeds of his youth. This wife suffers because she gave her heart too much to her husband, a heart which belonged to God alone, and showed an indulgence for him that was excessive and unthinking. This friend suffers because he was accomplished in his disorderly life of his friend, and because he took up his causes that made them his own, sharing his dissoluteness and profligacy, and we leave them to bear the weight of God's justice alone. In return for the misguided indulgence that they had for us, we are unwilling to relieve them of one day's expiation, to spare them centuries of torture. Ah, if you knew that at this moment your father, your mother, or your brothers the people you love most of all, were about to perish in a fire beneath a landslide, or that they are about to be engulfed by the sea or by flames. And if the only way to save them were to endanger your life, run to their aid and hold out your hand to them, you would not hesitate, even if it meant risking your life, going through flames and allowing your hand to be burnt. If fear or selfishness or any other craven feeling made you hesitate, you would be ashamed of yourself, and you would rightly consider yourself as the most heartless and thankless of men. There is a story that, at the time of the Crusades and the wars waged by their forebears in the East, a Christian knight was taken prisoner by the barbarians. Cast into a hideous dungeon, unable to obtain the required ransom, he faced only slavery and death. Suddenly a noble thought struck his daughter, tender as she was, and in the prime of her youth. Alone and without a guide, she traversed vast areas and succeeded in crossing over immense deserts. Arriving at the coast, she offered to work for the price of her fare. At length she reached the shores of Europe. Taking no rest, she at once traveled through the towns and appealed to the compassion of all, going from house to house in order to collect the sum demanded by the barbarians. As soon as she secured it, she prepared once more to face those perilous journeys and that laborious voyage from which she had escaped only by a miracle. Finally, she rejoined her father and, thanks to her superhuman efforts, and with the aid of the ransom obtained at the cost of so many perils and such severe hardship, managed to save her sire and snatch him from the fetters of captivity. What courage in a young girl! What energy and strength of filial affection! Like that heroic girl, we, too, have received from God a tender, compassionate, and loving soul. When an unfortunate person in extreme want stretches his hand out to us, we do not ask ourselves whether he is united to us by friendship and blood, our duty, our fortune, and especially our heart, instantly go out to him. If necessary, we would not hesitate to deprive ourselves of food and the most essential things in order to rescue an unfortunate man from degradation, captivity, or death. Well, for the sake of our parents, those who have loved us, who have bound to us by the closest bonds, we claim neither the sacrifice of your health, nor your freedom, nor the whole of your goods, but merely the drop of water which the rich man vainly asked of the compassion of Lazarus. What else shall I add? How many are there among you who, after a dissipated, disorderly life, have lost even the courage to make amends, and the will to repent? Who shudder at the thought of the day when their soul, stripped of their body and stained with a mass of iniquity, will be exposed alive before the gaze of the sovereign judge? There is an easy way to obtain mercy at the last moment, and it is the one which Jesus Christ himself teaches us. Facite vobis amicos ut recipient vos in aeterna tabernacula. Make unto you friends, that when you shall fail they may receive you into the everlasting dwellings. Obtain for yourself that gold which has served as the instrument of so many evil passions, the support and protection of the holy souls in purgatory. There is another thing which the dead say to us. You are mistaken about our desires and the kind of relief which our pains demand. You thought we were showing us your sorrow and love of the arranging a magnificent funeral. On the spot of our last abode you have erected monuments, which are not so much attributes to our memory as a gratification of your pride. What is the purpose of all this ostentation and splendor? If need be, pull down those mausoleums, smash those monuments and stones, and purchase one of their rubble, the prayers and suffrages of the church. That is what the dead ask of us, and if we listen to them, truly, I say to you, our charity will be blessed. The dead will not be thankless. One day, freed from their torments by our solicitude, they will help us by their powerful intercession, and when they fly up towards the heavenly fatherland, they will accompany us in procession. They will sing around us the hymn of thanksgiving and increase the joy of everlasting bliss, which will be our reward and joy.